This is Matthew Cratter from Trade University, and today I want to talk about Peter Zeihan's remarks on Bitcoin. A lot of you have asked me about this. Peter Zeihan saying that Bitcoin is a dumpster fire. Well, here's a dumpster fire. Here's Peter Zeihan. He is a geopolitical analyst who actually lives in Colorado, as I do. I haven't met him personally. I don't know him personally, but I think he's a very smart, very interesting guy. Has a lot of interesting things to say about Russia and the Ukraine and China, etc. And for those of you who know what Stratfor is, he used to be an analyst, and that's where he came out of. So basically, there's been a lot of headlines about his saying that Bitcoin is a dumpster fire. So that's what I want to try to summarize in this video. I would say, as I said before, he's quite smart about all things geopolitical. And an example I would give is that Zeihan is quite right that there is a serious possibility that Putin ends up using nuclear weapons at some point in this conflict if he gets desperate enough and feels that he has nothing to lose. But I don't think that Zeihan has done the work on Bitcoin. So my main source for this video is this interview that Peter Zeihan did with the folks from ARK Invest. And if you want to listen to it, it starts at roughly the 50-minute moment. So here's my what I hope is a steelman summary of Zeihan's position. He says that Bitcoin is not a store of value. It's not a medium of exchange. He compares it to one of those weird creatures that you get forming in a cheap money environment. So he compares it to Enron from the early 2000s, and then he compares it to the mid-2000s irresponsible subprime lending, which ultimately led to the U.S. banking system having serious problems in the great financial crisis of 2008 to 2009. So he thinks Bitcoin is a weird product of a free or cheap money environment, and that it can only exist in a regime with very low interest rates and lots of cheap money sloshing around. As the boomers retire, again, this is Zeihan's argument, as the boomers retire and move into U.S. Treasuries and low-risk investments, Bitcoin and other risky assets will suffer as a result as they move away from Bitcoin on the risk gradient, and as this environment of cheap money goes away. He also says that central banks and governments will never allow a competitor like Bitcoin, and that Bitcoin, the only things it's good at are these things that are clearly illegal, like money laundering, moving money across borders, which is another reason that governments will never allow it. So those are Zeihan's arguments. Again, those aren't my arguments, but that's what I want to respond to. So this argument that baby boomers retiring means the easy money environment of the past 20 years is going away, and that we're moving from an environment of very low capital costs and low interest rates to higher capital costs and high interest rates. He also says that because of this, Bitcoin is actually not even going to be around in a few years. Where I think he gets this wrong, I think he misunderstands. He's very good at geopolitics. I think he's less good at finance and economics. He sees the cheap money environment as mostly the result of these high baby boomer savings and high risk tolerance, and that cheap money is somehow going to disappear when they retire. I don't think this is true. I think the low interest rate environment, the high money printing environment with all this quantitative easing is mostly driven by the U.S. fiscal situation, where the Fed needs to monetize government spending. There's no buyer of last resort except the Fed for treasuries, and for many of the reasons that Peter Zeihan enumerates, the attack on Russia's FX reserves, etc. So you have fewer foreign buyers, foreign government buyers, and foreign central bank buyers of U.S. treasuries, and this means that the Fed needs to pick up the slack. Where I think he's wrong is I don't think interest rates get that high. The U.S. government, the stock market, the economy, as we're seeing in 2022, the Fed's trying to jawbone rates higher and raise rates higher and even shrink its balance sheet. And look what's happening. The Fed hasn't even gone very far. We're nowhere close to 1980, 1981 Paul Volcker levels of interest rates, and everything is completely blowing up in the economy. The economy is slowing. We may already be in recession. So this demonstrates how the U.S. government cannot handle higher interest rates. As I said, you can't do a Paul Volcker today because debt to GDP levels are so high. And I think some of Zeihan's comments made me think that he believes we're headed back to that sort of very high interest rate environment. And I just don't think that's true. Time will tell who is correct about this. But I think he is correct about the boomers in one sense. And this is not meant as an attack on boomers. I'm Gen X myself, but I don't want anyone to interpret this as a negative boomer comment. This is mostly, what I'm going to say though is, ironically, the U.S. budget deficit is mostly caused by these retirement promises made to boomers many, many years ago. When the government makes a promise, I think it should stand behind the promise. That being said, this was definitely unwise to promise this so many years ago, and it's causing problems now. So I think the way the syllogism is something like, boomers cannot stop retiring, so the government cannot stop spending, and the Fed cannot stop printing because they need to plug the budget deficit gap. The government needs to issue this debt to plug that gap, and the Fed is the buyer of last resort, and they buy these treasuries with printed money. They can't stop printing for any extended period of time, or we see the things happen that have been happening in the last few months. Here's the budget deficit, about $2 trillion, and I just wanted to link to this so you can see how large of a component Medicare and Medicaid, Social Security are. These numbers are going to go up massively as we reach the point where more than 50% of the boomers have retired. So that's his biggest, I would say that's his second biggest argument, that the environment of cheap money and low interest rates is going away. I don't think that's happening. I think the Fed is going to actually have to start printing again, and possibly even lowering interest rates, or certainly pausing later this year. I would say that Zeihan's biggest argument seems to be this vague idea that because Bitcoin is not yet won, that it will never win. So I think Zeihan is correct that Bitcoin is not yet a fully global reserve asset. It's obviously not held by all the central banks of the world. It hasn't reached its full potential as a store of value. I think we do get there. And it's also not a fully realized medium of exchange. You can't buy everything in the world in every country in Bitcoin. But I think Zeihan makes this mistake that just because it hasn't happened yet, then that it cannot happen. And this is a puzzling thing, because Zeihan is very good at, there's this Wayne Gretzky quote that the way you're good at hockey is you skate to where the puck is going to be, not to where it has been. And so any sort of forward analysis or investment thesis, you always have to be looking forwards. And the same is true for geopolitical analysis. It's sort of like saying, and I think Zeihan was very good in his previous book showing how the Russia-Ukraine situation could be the flashpoint for World War III. But it's a little bit like he said, well, Russia hasn't invaded Ukraine yet, so it's never going to invade Ukraine. He was able to look ahead, and there was actually one of the scenarios in one of his books that Russia would invade Ukraine, and it would set off these series of events. But for some reason, Zeihan's not able to do this with Bitcoin. He says Bitcoin hasn't succeeded yet. It's not everywhere, so it will not be everywhere. But I think he doesn't understand where this puck is going, where Bitcoin is headed. It's sort of like saying that Bitcoin is not a fully formed creature that has colonized the entire globe, which shows that it can never be. And part of his argument is just that governments and central banks will ban it. And this has been true in some places, but it's not what happened in El Salvador. It's not what happened in China. China has tried to ban Bitcoin many times, and yet we now know that it's actually still being mined there. There's still Bitcoin miners in China, and certainly there are many people hodling it in China as well, secretly. Also, the attack on Bitcoin has not really been what's happening in the U.S. We have Bitcoin senators. We have a lot of people who are using Bitcoin as an issue going into the November midterms. And we have an SEC chairman, for all his faults, who still has a very thorough understanding of Bitcoin and even understands quite clearly what separates it from the altcoins, which are basically just unregistered securities. So this is what's happening in the largest economy in the world, in the U.S. Bitcoin is not going to be banned. This is just completely incorrect. It might, they're going to try to co-opt it. They're going to try to surround it with KYC regulations, etc. But this is the funny thing about Bitcoin. You let it into your city. It's like a Trojan horse. It's you wheel it inside of your city, and then all the Greek soldiers jump out, and it's too late to stop it. And I think this is what Zeihan misses about Bitcoin. He also never details exactly how governments can stop a globally distributed peer-to-peer network, especially when these same large governments are unable to work together. It's very difficult for China and the U.S. to get anything done together, likewise the U.S. and Russia. And yet this idea that there could be some global ban where all these countries that hate each other and get along very poorly with each other are going to come to the same table and ban Bitcoin, it just seems highly unlikely. And it's very difficult to do with a decentralized network. You can do it with Ethereum. You just make a couple phone calls to Amazon Web Services and Infura, and you can shut it down. You can't do that with Bitcoin in the same way. Finally, I would suggest that Zeihan just doesn't understand that Bitcoin's scarcity is what makes it such good money and such a good place to hide from central bank money printing and central bank money devaluation. And this really comes out in that ARK Invest interview where he, it's a shocking moment where he says, why is fixed supply so important to you? The two analysts at ARK are talking about how Bitcoin has this fixed supply and this credible forward monetary policy. And Zeihan seems not to understand that good money is always scarce. If you can print it up, if it's very easy to produce, whether it's Luna or whether it's the US dollar, it's not going to hold its value in the same way. You require scarcity to have a good store value. And this is why gold has worked so well, and why gold is better than seashells, and also why Bitcoin is better than gold. So those are the two basic arguments: the environment of easy money going away and the fact that Bitcoin will just not be allowed to succeed. I think Zeihan is wrong on both accounts, and I think that he just hasn't put in enough time into this question. He's a brilliant guy. He has a huge amount of knowledge, and we live in a world where people are constantly asking you about Bitcoin if they view you as some sort of expert or guru. And so Zeihan has developed this series of answers, and they sound very smart on the surface unless you know something about Bitcoin. But I would hope that he does at some point find the time to do the research on Bitcoin, and he doesn't dig in his heels and become stubborn, because I think not understanding Bitcoin is going to lead to the wrong geopolitical analysis ultimately. That this new tech and this new ecosystem that we call Bitcoin is really becoming a major geopolitical player. And so this is why someone like Peter Zeihan really needs to get on board with it and at least come up with more than straw man critiques, just these old critiques about how it uses too much energy and it's too easy for governments to ban. We're just not quite at that level yet of Bitcoin FUD. He's a very smart guy. Maybe he would be able to poke some serious holes into Bitcoin if he spent the time investigating it, which I hope he does in the future. If you found this video helpful, be sure to hit that subscribe and like button. Hit the notification bell if you want to be notified when I publish my next video. And let me know your questions and comments in the comment section below. Thanks a lot for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.